Hello and welcome. I am Elaine Canyon, sweetly writing happily ever after, one book at a time. And in this video, I've got tips and tricks for discovery writers. Before we get started, I want to remind you that these are tips and tricks for discovery writers that have worked for me and other discovery writers that I've talked to. That doesn't mean that these are going to work for everybody, but I hope that you'll be able to take some of these and use them in your own writing to help you thrive as a discovery writer. Today, we're going to talk about how discovery writers can thrive with breadcrumbs. When I talk about breadcrumbs, I'm not actually referring to breadcrumbs, obviously. I am referring to the way that we use them in writing. When Hansel and Gretel are going through the forest, they drop breadcrumbs so that they can find their way back home. And when we're writing as discovery writers, it can be really easy to lose track of what we've already done, especially when we're excited about what we're writing and we're just running through. So for example, I write start to finish. I get an idea, I start at the beginning, and I run all the way through to the end because I'm just excited and I want to know what's going to happen at the end, and I'm excited to see what comes next. The problem with that can be that sometimes I will forget what a character's eye color is. And I write in the genre of fantasy romance. There are times where I forget how I spell the character's name, and you'll end up with 5 or 6 different spellings through the book in the first draft. And so breadcrumbs are a way for us to go through and leave notes for ourselves to help us to know what's going on in our book from start to finish. What color are my main character's eyes? Keeping it consistent. What is the spelling for the city that they're in? And how do I spell it? And let's keep that consistent. This also is sometimes called outlining as you go or reverse outlining, because you also use it to mark down what happened in past chapters. So what we're going to do is talk about the 2 ways that you can start leaving yourself breadcrumbs, or outlining as you go or reverse outlining. Outlining as you go, first of all, is done as you write the draft. After every chapter, you mark down what happened in the chapter. You mark down anything that the characters were wearing. You mark down what cities they were in. You keep track of the timeline of what happened chapter by chapter, the places that they were, and you can be as organized as you want to be. I know of authors who do this in Scrivener. I know of authors who do this in Plotter. I know of authors who do this on a yellow notepad that sits next to their computer. It really depends on what's going to work best for you. And so experiment with it. Try different things. Does it help to have a separate document next to the document that you're writing in on your computer? Does it help to have a physical notebook for you to write in, or something pretty to write on, or something that reminds you of what you're writing about? Finding what works best for you to keep track of all of this. And all of that feeds into the second way to do this, and this is, instead of outlining as you go, reverse outlining, which means that you're going to write the book start to finish, and that's what I do. And then when you go back and you do your first read through, you are keeping track of everything as you read. So you're reading and writing down, or in my case, reading and typing as I go. I keep track of everything in a separate document as I go. I'm looking into some programs that might help me do this a little bit better, because right now my Word documents get a little messy and hard to keep track of because I put everything into it, and that can get confusing sometimes. So before you start reverse outlining or outlining as you go, the next question becomes, well, why do we even bother? Why do we do this? Because we're discovery writers, why would we ever want an outline? And the answer is, this will save you in editing. When you are editing, it helps so much to have a clear picture of what you've done in your book. It helps to be able to look and say, oh, in chapter 1 we did this, in chapter 2 we did this, in chapter 3 we did this, and you will catch things that you're not going to catch on a read-through. Because in a read-through of a 70,000 word manuscript, you're gonna lose sight of things, especially because you wrote it and you're so familiar with it. But when you're forcing yourself to sit down and take the time to acknowledge each thing, each scene that happens in your book, you are now being able to look at the manuscript a little bit further away. And when you're editing, being able to take as many steps backwards as you can from your manuscript helps you see it with new eyes. And that's a huge help in creating a better finished product than what you have when you first finish your book. This also helps with basic consistency. Like I said at the beginning, eye color. I don't know why I can't keep eye color straight in my head, but apparently my characters are just going to have eyes that range the gambit of what I want them to be. And their eyes will just change color throughout the entire manuscript. So deciding on what their color is going to be, usually just going with whatever I said in the first time I mentioned it, and changing it so it's consistent throughout. Something else is keeping names straight. I write both on my computer, but also on my phone. And I am lazy, and I don't like to add every fantasy name spelling that I create into my phone's dictionary. And so my phone autocorrects my fantasy names all the time. And it gets entertaining, obviously. I have a character whose name is Damien, and my phone likes to make him Domino's consistently. I don't know why. There is not a Domino's close to where I live. Not even close. But apparently, my phone has decided that Damien should be Domino's. And it's something that I have to go back and I have to make sure that I fix and that I check. And so when I have this outline that says, hey, Damien is spelled this way, then when I make a typo and I switch 2 letters in his name, or when my phone decides to autocorrect for me, I have a reference that says, this is his name and this is how it's spelled. This is also a good way to create character sheets to be able to go through and say, as you go or after, this is my character, this is who they are. I don't ever go in depth on character outlines. When I'm discovery writing, none of that. When I'm writing, none of that matters to me. I'm figuring out who they are. I'm discovery writing them. And as I write them and as I figure out who they are, they grow and they become more. And so I can take the time, I don't often, but I can take the time while I'm writing to make note of that and to let myself know in my notes that, hey, by the way, this is something about my character that I didn't know at the beginning and now I know it about him and I can attach that to him. That is a huge help at the end when you're trying to map your character arc and make sure that you like where your character started and like where your character finished and that was true to what you wanted it to be in your story. Another thing that this helps with that I really enjoy is that it can help get you unstuck. So like I said, I don't do this until the end, except I will start outlining as I go and reverse outlining if I hit a roadblock in my manuscript. I will go back to chapter 1 and I will begin to mark and map out my whole manuscript up to the point that I'm in. And usually before I get to the point where I've stuck, I will have got myself unstuck. I've only ever made it 3 chapters before I was like, oh, I know what to do. And I've moved back to that white space and I've started again. But it's a huge help to be able to go back and start looking at your manuscript from a few steps backwards of identifying this is the timeline, identifying this is what the character's name is, and this is what they're wearing, and this is the city they're in. Being able to look at those things, being able to check your plot beats as you go. You're checking to see if you're hitting the plot beats, assuming you write in genre fiction. So in romance, there are specific things that need to happen to be a romance novel. It has to have a happily ever after. But I also need to make sure that there's a first kiss. And I have a specific place that I like to put my first kisses in, a general rule of thumb that I use. And so that helps me to see, did I make that in my discovery writing? Did I make sure that that first kiss happened in that percentage that I like to have it happen in? And did I make sure if I'm further along in the manuscript that There were times where the characters were able to be close the way I wanted them to be close. Were there the near misses that I needed them to have? Am I making it obvious to the reader what is coming next? Am I hiding what I want to hide? Things like that. It lets me take a step back and have a more critical look at my manuscript so that I can make sure that my voice is coming out the way I want it to, so I can make sure that my story is progressing in a way that I like. I don't necessarily always know where I'm ending, but it allows me to check and make sure that I'm happy where I am. So to wrap it up, Breadcrumbs is basically just leaving yourself notes, and they can be as detailed or as minimal as you want them to be. You can go so far as to create an entire outline for your story, either as you go or after you've finished. And you can just be specific about the things that you struggle with. I don't tend to create a really detailed outline when I go back and reverse outline. I'm usually just keeping track of this happened at this time, 2 weeks later this happened, a month later this happened, and my characters' names, and for heaven's sakes, their eye color. But you get to be as detailed and as specific as you want to be. Nothing about outlining as you go or reverse outlining has to be rigid. One of the things that we've talked about before, and I will say it again, discovery writers can't be constricted. You have to have the space to play. And when you have the space to play, everything is more fun. Do you have tips that you use as a discovery writer or things that have worked for you? I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I post videos on Wednesdays and you'll get to hear more about discovery writing, self-publishing, and graphic and cover design. I hope to see you back soon.